Islam and Judaism have a very complicated history with each other. But how do the two religions actually compare? Are they very similar, or are they very different? Let's find out by evaluating 5 different categories: religious texts, perceptions of God, religious duties, their founders, and finally, current day facts. Let's get into it. The religious texts. Within Judaism, especially Orthodox Judaism, the Torah is considered one of the most important texts. It consists of the first 5 books of Moses and helps establish the law, the foundation of Judaism. Branching out from the Torah is the Tanakh, which is basically the Old Testament in Christian terms. The books outside of the Torah are broken down into 2 different categories: books of the prophets and books of writings. And the writings mostly consist of proverbs, poetic writings, things that carry either practical wisdom or emotionally charged language. And surrounding these texts are rabbinical texts, and the most famous of which is the Talmud. They also tend to have prayer books and other commentaries, but the ones I listed so far are the most common pieces of literature within Judaism. The Muslims, on the other hand, adhere to the book of the Quran, which they believe to be the literal words of God revealed to the Prophet Muhammad. And the second most important texts are the Hadith, which are basically sayings of the Prophet Muhammad. They're not the literal words of God, but they help outline how Muhammad lived and some practical advice and wisdom. So in the case of their religious texts, the two religions are different. They follow different texts, they follow different precepts, although it is important to note that Muslims do have some level of reverence or respect for the Old Testament or the Tanakh, but they think that it has lost some of its meaning and value and has been corrupted over the years. Jews, on the other hand, do not recognize the Quran as words from God, and they do not care about the Hadith in general. Their perceptions of God. Both Jews and Muslims are monotheists, meaning they believe in one God. And unlike Christians, they do not believe in a triune God, meaning God being made up of 3 persons. Rather, they believe that God is one being and one person. And they also tend to believe in a personal God, meaning a God that has some level of investment and care for his creation and for the world. Although how God interacts with his creation does differ between the two. For instance, within Islam, God does not talk directly to humans. Rather, he uses messengers to deliver his words, like in the case of Muhammad, who received the words of Allah from the angel Gabriel. But in Judaism, we see within some books of the Tanakh that God actually speaks directly to the prophet. But what does God expect from the different religions? This leads into our third category, religious duties. How both religions try to honor God does differ, but also has some overlap as well. Islam operates with a scale system in mind, meaning that Allah takes into account your good and your bad deeds throughout your life, and if your good deeds outweigh your bad deeds, there's a good chance that Allah will show you mercy, forgiving your bad deeds and allowing you into paradise. But if it's the other way around, he will most likely judge you for your sins. So a good Muslim will submit to Allah and rack up good deeds to honor Allah and get into paradise. And Jews also tend to operate on a system of duty and good works, although the scale system doesn't directly apply. Jews often believe that they can best honor God by being the best adherents as they can to the law of Moses, and by abiding by the general precepts laid out throughout the entire Tanakh. And those who do well to obey God, follow the law, and follow the precepts established within the words of God will gain favor from God. What that favor translates into is different among different sects of Judaism, but it can take on the form of either some sort of afterlife like heaven, or a general favor and guidance in this world. However, what is considered good exactly when it comes to these religions? What specific duties must they follow? And that actually does differ quite a bit between the two religions. Both religions have general morality parameters that you can find within a lot of belief systems, like do not steal and do not murder. Although their traditions outside of these moral precepts do differ, although there is some surprising overlap as well. Within Islam, you can find 5 main principles that stand out. There are more than these, but these are the basics. The first principle is confessing faith in one God and that Muhammad is his messenger. Now, of course, Jews also profess faith in one God, but they do not acknowledge Muhammad as a messenger or prophet of God. Principle 2 is praying 5 times a day at specific times during the day. Traditional Orthodox Jews will also pray 3 times a day, but it's not the same type of prayers that Muslims will pray 5 times a day. Muslims are also expected to donate certain percentages of their wealth to the poor and needy, and you can find a similar concept within Judaism known as tithing, where Orthodox Jews and more traditional Jews will give a percentage of their wealth to those in need and to their community. The percentages and specifics differ between the two faiths, but they do have concepts of charity within them. Principle 4 for Islam is fasting over Ramadan. Jews do not honor Ramadan and they do not fast over that time normally, but they do honor some different holidays of their own. And the 3 major ones are the Passover, the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of Booths. And every week they acknowledge the Sabbath, which is a holy day for them. And finally, Muslims will travel to Mecca at least once in their life, if able to honor God. Jews do not do this, although they may travel to Israel or to Jerusalem just due to its religious significance to them. And throughout the entire Mosaic Law, there are tons and tons of specific rules and traditions that Orthodox Jews will follow. These include food laws, laws about clothing, laws about how to work, laws about how to live in general, and laws about basically everything. And Orthodox Jews will try their best to follow all these to the best they can. But there is some overlap in these Mosaic laws within Islam. For instance, Muslims will not eat pork and Jews do not eat pork. But Jews also abide by many laws that Muslims do not acknowledge as necessary. So despite these small overlaps, such as praying 3 times instead of 5 and, having some similar food laws, there is some overlap you can see there. They still have a lot of differences and their traditions do vary. The 4th category I wanted to tackle were their religious founders. And on this section, I am not commenting on what secular historians believe to be true about these figures I'm going to be mentioning, or the general perception historically on these figures. I'm simply talking about the perception within these religions themselves, based on their own texts and based in their own studies. Starting with Islam, the most prominent prophet is Muhammad, where modern-day Islam can find its roots. Muslims believe that Muhammad, around the age of 40, received his first revelation from the angel Gabriel. And then over the course of several years, received more revelations, and he started to dictate them to his followers, which then eventually became the Quran. And throughout his life, he had 11 wives and multiple children, and was known to be a political and military leader. He was often successful in battle, managing to conquer many of the pagan nations around him, controlling the Medina area and eventually Mecca itself. His predecessors would continue beyond this and continue to conquer more land within the Southern Europe region, within the Asia region, Northern Africa, Middle East, that area. And they would continue to convert many to their religion over that course of time. Judaism has kind of 2 religious founders you could point to. You could point to Abraham or you could point to Moses. I'm going to focus on Moses in this section simply because Moses is believed to be the person who wrote the first 5 books of the Bible or the Torah, and he's also the prophet to help deliver the law to the people of Israel, which is really the foundation of Judaism. To start off, Moses was born an Israelite. He was adopted by Egyptian royalty due to a series of circumstances, but he ended up having to leave because he murdered an Egyptian to defend an Israelite. At the time, the Israelites were by and large slaves to the Egyptians. Eventually, God called him to lead the people of Israel out of slavery. Through a series of miracles that God performed through Moses, the people of Israel were let go by Egypt, and they traveled through the desert for 40 years to reach the promised land that God promised to them. It was supposed to be a land of freedom and a land of prosperity. And Moses, throughout this journey, was considered a rather righteous person, although he did commit sins that prohibited him from being able to enter into the promised land. But overall, he is acknowledged and recognized as a righteous prophet. He was also considered a good judge and a good leader of Israel at the time. And his predecessor Joshua would lead the next generation of Israelites into the promised land and conquer a lot of the pagan nations that lived there at the time. Today, the 2 religions plus Christianity make up the 3 major Abrahamic faiths. There are nearly 2 billion Muslims in the world and only 16 million Jews, over a third of which live in modern-day Israel. There are 5 fairly well-known branches of Islam, although 2 of them are argued to not be branches of Islam or to be extremely eccentric. And within Judaism, there are 4 streams of Judaic thought, although many people consider themselves Jews solely on the basis of ethnicity and their genealogy and background. Many people like this would be considered secular Jews. And each of these religions have a large presence around the world in multiple different countries, especially Islam. And while Islam is trying to spread its religion and convert others to the faith, Judaism often keeps to itself, focusing on following the law and protecting their own community. And there you have it. The basic breakdown of Islam and Judaism, how they kind of compare, how they're different, and just giving you a basic understanding of both of them. Thank you for watching. And as always, friends, go out there and light the world yourselves.